In a time ravaged by greed and stupidity, human suffering becomes prime-time entertainment. A barbaric lust for death is the only thing that satisfies the masses. Answer your phone for a violent reminder of a simpler time. Hotline Miami 2, wrong number.
Is the 80s flavored slasher movie sequel to Hotline Miami, and I also think this is the first fun new game I've played this whole year. In fact, I think I forgot what fun was until loading it up. And that's because, just like in the first game, Hotline Miami 2 is brutally honest about itself, and also about just what an action video game is. The exaggerated gore, the quick respawns, and the fourth wall breaking horror create an incredibly self-critical tone. Meanwhile, the frenetic, fast, one-hit kill combat creates an incredibly pleasing game, where intricate action choreography feels just as amazing as it looks. For those who haven't played the first game, do it. You're gonna need to know what happened before to understand what's happening here, and the core themes from the first game have only been expanded here. It's still a twisted celebration of video game violence that manages to be shameless and self-conscious at the same time, both to a greater degree than the first one. But this time, there's more content. More levels, more guns, more player abilities, and more drama, believe it or not. You're going to be clicking through a lot more story scenes in this one than the first game. After a brutish intro, whose shock value is completely spoiled if you follow the news at all, is a clever story that mimics the player's own real-life experiences with these games. After murdering countless Russian gangsters in the first game, and having quite a successful run with it, our previous protagonist has become somewhat of a mysterious celebrity in the game's universe. No one knows if he was killing gangsters for justice, for pleasure, or for hatred, and in the sequel he's inspired other copycat killers, misguided vigilantes, schlocky horror movies, and even non-fictional books. It's a confusing, non-linear storyline told from multiple angles and times. You might not be able to follow it clearly until your second playthrough, on a harder mode that flips all the maps upside down. And between all the different characters, time periods, and arcs you have to juggle around, there's a lot more depth and substance to this story than the first game. I never would have thought that Hotline Miami, of all the video game universes out there, was one that could use a good dose of lore. But one thing I could always use a good dose of is great video games. And here's Hotline Miami, with its horrific gore, its nightmarish stories, and its nauseating visual effects that it somehow manages to deliver with an upbeat tone. With catchy, loud neo-80s tracks and bright, quirky pixel art with combat that is just so far up my alley I've lost myself in it. My favorite new feature in the sequel is the Alex and Ash mask, where you control two characters at the same time. Left-click chainsaws, right-click shoots. You can easily double your damage output with these guys, but it takes twice as much coordination out of you to do it right. So you're rushing into rooms, mashing down both mouse buttons, tracking movement from both sides of your peripheral vision, and snapping your aim back and forth at breakneck speeds, and it feels amazing! It feels like becoming some kind of overpowering, terrifying god of destruction. An extremely fragile, easily killable god of destruction. It's not hard to get locked into some kind of trance with this game. It's fast and satisfying enough to make it worth your while to just block out the rest of the world and just play to the beat of this amazing music. The combat is so solid that I had more fun drifting away into self-imposed metagames than actually clearing the levels. That combo multiplier can never get as high as I want it to. I can die and retry a billion times and won't care, just as long as I figure out a little bit more of a high score combo route each time. I love the fact that in a game with this kind of theming, I can use the word trance in complete sincerity. It mirrors the experience of our delusional protagonists, who can't tell what's real or not, and neither can we. Levels will sometimes end with the director yelling "cut," or our character waking up from a dream. Sometimes you'll spot camera equipment placed on the edge of a map. Little hints are everywhere that all these deaths might be staged, but maybe they're not. Hotline Miami is honest about itself like that. The violence might not be real, but the thrill of it is, and it's fully aware of what debauchery that kind of enjoyment is. Both the player and the characters are confusing themselves over what's real, and they doze in and out of trances of obsessive killing. It's a hazy, fever dream world where the value of human lives and of the player's own morals are determined at the whims of sinister game developers. And this time, their $15 package took me 8 hours to complete, as opposed to the first game's 5 hours. and there's no real equivalent to the downer of a level that was the hospital from the first game. Instead, this sequel's problems arise from old problems becoming worse because of the new content. A lot of the frustrations still have to do with the interface. There's no easy way to tell what weapon your character's gonna pick up out of a pile of weapons. A little bit of mouse over animation could have helped alleviate this problem. And it does become a real problem in a lot of the levels of the second half, where some new enemies require specific weapons to take down, and piles of these new weapons stack up quickly. Picking up the wrong one or scrolling through every weapon in a pile until you hit the right one takes time, it breaks combos, and it kills players. I also wish there was a way to track cursor movement after locking onto enemies. With colors this bright, it's easy to lose track of your own cursor as well as enemies, especially after popping one of them with the lock on and then trying to recenter your cursor afterwards. Maybe having an unlocked cursor still available during the lock-on would make those follow-up shots too easy, but it would also cut down on a lot of frustrating deaths that felt like they had more to do with the lack of interface than a lack of skill. And, just like in the first game, expect to get killed a lot by off-screen enemies who are completely out of your view range. This is an old problem, exacerbated by the bigger levels in this sequel. There are a lot more open areas with no cover here than there were last time. Baiting the AI around corners is a more legit strategy than ever now. And despite all the new features there's one area that feels like it's been scaled down from the first game, and that's your mask selection. Since the story changes characters so much, you're oftentimes playing as someone who doesn't wear a mask at all. Instead, they'll have their own special ability, so the total number of different perks in there is probably about the same as the first game, but ultimately, your options for playing through each level in your own particular way are decreased from the first game. Which kinda sucks. It renders the unlocking system a bit useless, since you can't really control whether or not you can use those unlocks at all. In the next level, they just might not be available. It's up to the whims of the developers, you can't predict it. Different characters sometimes have different rules and different options, and they're applied inconsistently throughout the campaign. And I bet that's gonna bother a lot of people, but it's just one setback, made necessary by the narrative, in a pile of new features and levels that I still had a blast with. For the most part, it's a sequel that does exactly what a sequel should. It's more of the same, but bigger, better, and more intriguing. It manages to answer questions from the first game, answer new questions of its own, and then wrap everything up into a definitive conclusion with an excellent New Game Plus for afterwards. And even after that, they're promising a level editor being released in spring, so you get a lot of value for your $15. This sequel represents a huge step up in ambition and scope from the first game, but it does not represent a huge upgrade of polish and production values. But I think that's a good thing. It's rough around the edges because it should be. It could easily be described as a playful exploration of the darker hypocrisies of pop culture. Cheerful music, fun gameplay, and a comedy of spectacles preclude these horrifying slaughters with visual feedback that looks just sickening if you stop for a second to actually see what you're doing. This game, this style, and this story are all a perfect match for each other, with each one being as nauseating and thrilling, disturbing and uplifting, hilarious and tragic as the other.